On the night before the world changed forever, a pregnant woman vanished from her home in Modesto. By sunrise, police would be searching fields, dogs would be dragging the scent toward a nearby park, and the man begging cameras for help would soon be suspected of murder. Welcome to Cold Case Beacon. If cases like this pull at you, if you believe the forgotten deserve to be remembered and the truth deserves to be told, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and leave a comment below. Let's uncover this together. Laci Denise Rocha was born on May 4, 1975, in Modesto, California, a quiet agricultural city in the heart of the Central Valley. Her parents, Sharon and Dennis Rocha, raised her with love and structure. Friends who knew her in elementary school remember a girl who smiled easily, who brought homemade cookies to class, who never forgot a birthday. By high school, she had developed a passion for gardening, spending hours in her mother's backyard planting roses and lavender. After graduating in 1993, she enrolled at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, majoring in ornamental horticulture. It was at Cal Poly that Laci met Scott Peterson. He was studying agricultural business, a tall man with dark hair and an easy charm. Friends said they seemed well matched. Scott was attentive. Laci was nurturing. They began dating in 1994. On December 9, 1997, Laci Rocha became Laci Peterson. The wedding took place at Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort in Avila Beach, a small venue surrounded by eucalyptus trees. Sharon Rocha later described the day as perfect. There were no visible cracks. No warning signs. After the wedding, Scott and Laci settled in Modesto, moving into a modest home on Covina Avenue. Laci took a job as a substitute teacher. Scott went to work for a European fertilizer company. They hosted dinner parties, took weekend trips to the coast, adopted a golden retriever named Mackenzie. From the outside, it looked like they had everything. By the summer of 2002, Laci was pregnant. She had wanted this for years. She kept a journal where she wrote letters to her unborn son, describing the world he would enter. She and Scott had already chosen a name, Conner. The nursery was painted soft blue. A crib stood in the corner. Tiny clothes hung in the closet, washed and folded and waiting. Laci was radiant. Friends said she glowed, that she talked endlessly about becoming a mother. Her due date was February 10, 2003. Just 6 more weeks. But while Laci prepared for motherhood, Scott had begun living a separate life. In early November of 2002, he met a woman named Amber Fry at a business conference in Anaheim. Amber was a massage therapist living in Fresno, a single mother looking for a relationship. Scott presented himself as exactly what she wanted: single, successful, ready to settle down. And he lied to her with a precision that suggested practice. On November 20, 2002, less than 3 weeks after meeting Amber, Scott told her his wife had died. Not that Laci was sick. Not that they were separated. He said she was dead. He said this was his first holiday season without her. Amber believed him. When Thanksgiving came, Scott told Amber he would be traveling to Maine to spend the holiday with his family. In reality, he was in Modesto, sitting at a table with Laci, her parents, and the rest of the family. He lived in 2 worlds. And he kept them separate with the ease of someone who had done it before. December 24, 2002. Christmas Eve. Modesto was cold that morning, the kind of damp chill that seeps through jackets and settles in your chest. Laci Peterson woke up in the home she shared with Scott, 8 months pregnant, her belly round and tight. She had plans for the day. She wanted to walk Mackenzie at the park. She needed to pick up groceries. That evening, the family would gather at her mother's house for dinner. Scott later told police that he and Laci ate breakfast together that morning. He said she was wearing a white shirt and black pants, though he would change this description multiple times. He said she planned to mop the kitchen floor, then walk the dog. He said he decided, on a whim, to drive to the Berkeley Marina to go fishing. Alone. On Christmas Eve. He said he left the house around 9:30 in the morning. He said Laci was alive when he walked out the door. The Berkeley Marina is 90 miles from Modesto. It sits on the eastern shore of San Francisco Bay, a stretch of cold gray water where the wind cuts sharp and the fog hangs low. December 24th was overcast and cold, with temperatures in the low 50s. Not ideal fishing weather. Scott later told investigators he had gone there to fish for sturgeon. He said he launched his small aluminum boat, a 14-foot craft he had recently purchased. He said he fished for a few hours. He said he caught nothing. But investigators noticed something else, something Scott didn't expect anyone to find. When police searched Scott's truck in the days following Laci's disappearance, they found fishing lures still in their packaging, never used. The boat showed minimal signs of recent activity. No fish scales. No bait remnants. No watermarks. Scott could not provide a clear timeline of when he arrived at the marina or when he left. He had no receipts. He had no witnesses. And when detectives asked him why he chose to go fishing on Christmas Eve, Scott had no compelling answer. He said it was a last-minute decision. Scott said he returned home around 4:30 that afternoon. The house was empty. Mackenzie was in the backyard, his leash still attached, wandering in circles. Laci was gone. Scott said he showered, checked the house, and then called Laci's mother. At 5:15 that evening, Scott Peterson dialed Sharon Rocha and asked if Laci was with her. Sharon said no. Scott told her Laci was missing. By 6 o'clock, Sharon had called the Modesto Police Department. Officers arrived within the hour. They began canvassing the neighborhood, searching the nearby park where Laci often walked Mackenzie. They found nothing. They questioned Scott about Laci's habits, her state of mind, her plans for the day. Scott answered calmly. He showed no visible distress. He did not cry. He repeated the same story: he had gone fishing, and when he came home, she was gone. By Christmas morning, the search for Laci Peterson had become a full-scale operation. Volunteers poured into Modesto, hundreds of people carrying flyers with Laci's photograph. They walked through fields and alleys and abandoned lots. The media descended on Covina Avenue, news vans lining the street. The story had everything the press craves: a beautiful victim, a mysterious disappearance, a husband whose behavior seemed just off enough to raise questions. Scott Peterson stood in front of those cameras and spoke. He said he believed Laci had been abducted. He said he was cooperating fully with police. Sharon Rocha stood beside him, her voice breaking as she pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. The public watched. And the public began to wonder. Behind the scenes, investigators were already focusing on Scott. His alibi felt thin. The fishing trip made no sense. The timeline did not add up. And then there were the small things, the details that accumulate like sediment. When officers asked Scott what Laci had been wearing, he gave different answers at different times. When they asked what he had used for bait while fishing, Scott said he could not remember. When they asked if anyone had seen him at the marina, he said no, he had been alone. Detectives obtained a warrant to search the Peterson home. They went through every room, every closet, every drawer. They found nothing. No blood spatter. No disturbed furniture. The home was clean. Too clean, some investigators later said. They turned their attention to Scott's truck and boat. In the bed of the truck, they found a tarp and a toolbox. In Scott's warehouse workspace, they found 5 bags of cement mix, each weighing 94 pounds. Scott said he had been making anchors for his boat. When detectives asked to see the anchors, Scott could not produce them. When they asked why he needed 5 anchors for a small aluminum fishing boat, he had no clear answer. The cement had been purchased on December 9, 2002. 15 days before Laci disappeared. 15 days before Scott claimed he had decided, on a whim, to go fishing. And then came the moment everything snapped. Investigators examined Scott's computer. They found internet searches conducted in the days leading up to Laci's disappearance. Searches for tide charts for the San Francisco Bay. Searches for water depth and current patterns near the Berkeley Marina. Searches for information about how long it takes a body to surface in cold water. Scott said he had been researching fishing conditions. The prosecution would later argue he had been planning something else entirely. And just when police thought the case couldn't get darker. On December 30, 2002, 6 days after Laci's disappearance, a woman named Amber Fry walked into the Modesto Police Department. She told investigators she had been dating Scott Peterson. She said she had met him in November, that he had told her he was single, that he had pursued her with intensity and focus. She said she had seen the news coverage and recognized Scott immediately. She was horrified. She had believed his lies. And now she understood she had been romantically involved with a man whose pregnant wife was missing. Amber agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. She turned over her phone records and emails. And then detectives made a request: would she continue speaking with Scott and record the conversations? Amber said yes. For the next several weeks, every time Scott Peterson called Amber Fry, the call was recorded. What those tapes captured would become some of the most damaging evidence in the case. Scott did not stop calling Amber after Laci disappeared. He called her from Modesto while search parties combed the streets. He called her from his truck, from his warehouse, from the home he had shared with Laci. And he lied. He told Amber he was in Paris for New Year's Eve, standing near the Eiffel Tower, watching fireworks over the Seine. He described the lights, the champagne, the crowds. He sounded joyful. He sounded free. In reality, Scott was standing in a park in Modesto, attending a candlelight vigil for Laci. In the background of the recording, you can hear voices. You can hear someone calling Laci's name. You can hear Scott lying in real time, performing a fantasy while surrounded by people praying for his wife's safe return. In other recordings, Scott spoke to Amber as though Laci had never existed. He talked about trips they would take, places they would visit, the life they would build. He said he was looking forward to spending time with her daughter. He said he could not wait to be done with all of this and move on. There was no grief in his voice. No panic. No mention of Laci unless Amber brought her up. And when Amber did ask about the missing wife she had just learned existed, Scott admitted Laci was his wife but claimed he had told Amber about her before, that he had been honest from the beginning. The recordings proved otherwise. By mid-January of 2003, the Modesto Police Department had named Scott Peterson a person of interest. The public noticed. The media amplified it. And Scott began to change. On January 17, he sold Laci's car. On January 24, he inquired about selling his truck. He dyed his hair from dark brown to reddish blonde. He grew a goatee. He told friends he was receiving death threats and needed to disguise his appearance. To investigators, these were not the actions of a grieving husband. These were the actions of a man preparing to disappear. The searches continued. Volunteers walked every inch of Modesto and the surrounding farmland. They dragged rivers and checked storm drains. Nothing turned up. Laci Peterson had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. Weeks became months. The media coverage began to fade. The case grew cold. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. On April 13, 2003, nearly 4 months after Laci Peterson disappeared, a man walking his dog along the rocky shoreline of Point Isabel Regional Shoreline in Richmond, California, noticed something in the shallow water. At first, he thought it was a doll. He moved closer. It was not a doll. It was the body of an infant, badly decomposed, partially clothed, tangled in weeds near the rocks. The man called the police. The following day, April 14, less than 2 miles away, a couple walking along the shore of the Berkeley Marina found something else. It was the body of a woman, headless, missing both arms and one leg, torso covered in what appeared to be maternity clothing. The remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, the skin mottled and bloated from months submerged in cold salt water. The couple ran. They called 911. What surfaced next shattered any illusion of coincidence. Investigators collected both sets of remains and sent them to the Contra Costa County Coroner's Office. DNA samples were extracted and compared against reference samples obtained from Sharon Rocha and members of the Rocha family. On April 17, the results came back. The woman was Laci Peterson. The infant was her son, Conner. They had been in the water for months, carried by tides and currents, until the ocean finally released them near the exact location Scott Peterson claimed to have been fishing on December 24, 2002. The medical examiner noted that Laci's body showed signs consistent with having been weighted down. Areas of the torso displayed markings that suggested pressure from a heavy object, possibly tied or strapped around the body to keep it submerged. The cement anchors Scott had claimed to make, the anchors he could not produce when asked, may have been the very thing that kept Laci beneath the surface until decomposition caused her to rise. Conner's body had been expelled from Laci's womb post-mortem, sometime during the months they spent underwater. He had never taken a breath. He had died with his mother. On April 18, 2003, Scott Peterson was arrested. He was not at home. He was in a parking lot near the Torrey Pines Golf Course in San Diego, California, roughly 100 miles south of Modesto and just 15 miles from the Mexican border. He was driving a vehicle registered to his mother. When officers approached, Scott was calm. He did not resist. He did not ask why he was being arrested. A search of the vehicle revealed more than $10,000 in cash, bundled and hidden in various compartments. There were multiple credit cards. There was camping equipment, a tent, a sleeping bag, freeze-dried food, water purification tablets. There was a shovel. There was rope. There were 4 separate cell phones. And there was a laminated map with a route highlighted in yellow, a route that led to Amber Frey's workplace in Fresno. Scott had also been carrying his brother's driver's license. His hair was dyed blonde. His beard had grown in full. To investigators, the conclusion was inescapable. Scott Peterson had been preparing to run. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, first-degree murder for Laci Peterson, second-degree murder for Conner Peterson. Scott pleaded not guilty to both charges. The trial of Scott Peterson began on June 1, 2004, in Redwood City, California. The case had been moved from Modesto because of intense pretrial publicity. The courtroom became the center of national attention. News crews camped outside. Legal analysts filled cable news segments. The public watched, divided. The prosecution's case was built on circumstantial evidence. There was no murder weapon. There was no crime scene. There was no confession. But what the prosecution did have was a pattern, a web of lies and behavior that, when viewed together, told a story. They presented the affair with Amber Frey. They played the recorded phone calls, hours of audio in which Scott lied and showed no concern for his missing wife. The prosecution brought in forensic experts who testified that a single strand of Laci's hair, with the root still attached, had been found in a pair of pliers on Scott's boat. The defense argued the hair could have transferred innocently. But the prosecution pressed, why would Laci's hair be on a boat Scott claimed to have used alone, on a day she never made it out of the house? They walked the jury through Scott's internet searches. Tide charts for the Berkeley Marina. Water depth and current information. The timing of those searches, conducted in early December, weeks before the supposed last-minute fishing trip. They presented the cement purchases, the missing anchors, the toolbox in Scott's truck. They reconstructed the timeline of December 24, showing that Scott's alibi was paper-thin, supported by nothing but his own words. The defense countered by attacking the lack of physical evidence. They pointed out that no blood had been found in the Peterson home. No forensic evidence placed Laci's body in Scott's truck or boat. They called a neighbor who testified she had seen Laci walking Mackenzie in the park on the morning of December 24, after Scott claimed to have already left for the marina. The prosecution challenged her memory. She had not come forward until weeks later. Her descriptions of Laci's clothing had varied. But she did not waver. But investigators hadn't seen anything yet. The emotional center of the trial was Amber Frey. She took the stand and testified for 8 days, recounting her relationship with Scott in meticulous detail. She described how he had pursued her, how he had lied about being single, how he had told her his wife was dead weeks before Laci actually disappeared. And then the recordings were played. The courtroom fell silent. For hours, the jury listened to Scott's voice. They heard him lie about being in Paris. They heard him talk about his future with Amber while Laci was missing. They heard him laugh, flirt, make plans. When prosecutors played the recording of Scott calling from the vigil, pretending to be in Europe while standing just feet from searchers holding candles for his wife, several jurors shifted in their seats. One closed her eyes. Another stared at Scott, unblinking. The silence in that courtroom was absolute. Even the sketch artists stopped drawing. Amber's voice, when she spoke on the stand, was steady but strained. She cried as she described the moment she realized the truth. She said she had been devastated when she learned Scott's wife was missing, that she had agreed to cooperate with police because it was the right thing to do. The defense tried to discredit her. But Amber did not waver. She had the recordings. And the recordings spoke for themselves. The trial lasted 5 months. The jury heard from more than 180 witnesses. On November 12, 2004, after deliberating for 7 days, they reached a verdict. The courtroom was silent as the foreperson stood. Guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Laci Peterson. Guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Conner Peterson. Sharon Rocha collapsed in her seat, sobbing. Scott Peterson showed no visible reaction. The penalty phase began immediately. The prosecution argued that the murders were especially heinous, that Scott had killed a defenseless pregnant woman and her unborn child, that he had shown no remorse. On March 16, 2005, the jury sentenced Scott Peterson to death. He was sent to San Quentin State Prison to await execution. For Sharon Rocha, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but it could never bring back Laci or Conner. In a victim impact statement, Sharon described the hole left by her daughter's absence. She talked about the grandchild she would never hold. She said the hardest part was the silence, the empty spaces where Laci's laughter used to be. But the story did not end with the sentencing. In August of 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned Scott Peterson's death sentence. The court found that the trial judge had improperly dismissed potential jurors who opposed the death penalty. However, the conviction itself remained intact. Scott was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2021, Scott's defense team filed a motion for a new trial, arguing that a juror had committed misconduct by failing to disclose she had been a victim of domestic violence while pregnant. In December of 2022, a judge denied the motion. The conviction stood. Scott Peterson remains incarcerated at Mule Creek State Prison. He continues to maintain his innocence. 20 years have passed since Laci Peterson disappeared. The case remains a fixture in American true crime. It is a case that divides people. Some see the evidence as overwhelming. Others see reasonable doubt. The legal system has answered the question of Scott's guilt. A jury convicted him. A judge sentenced him. But the questions linger. Scott Peterson has never explained the cement anchors. He has never explained the internet searches for tide charts and water currents. He has never explained why his wife's body was found in the exact location he claimed to have been fishing. He has never explained the calls to Amber Frey, the lies, the performance of a man unburdened by tragedy. He says only that he is innocent, that the real killer has never been found. His defense team points to the lack of physical evidence in the Peterson home. They cite witnesses who claimed to see Laci alive after Scott left. They argue the case was built on character assassination. These arguments have not succeeded in court, but they persist. Was the evidence strong enough? Could there have been another explanation? In interviews conducted years after the trial, Scott's family members have said they still believe in his innocence. His mother visits him regularly. His sister maintains a website proclaiming the evidence was circumstantial. But when asked directly what they think happened to Laci, none of them have offered an alternative explanation. No other suspect. No other theory. Just silence. The silence, it seems, runs in the family. Laci Peterson was 27 years old when she died. Her son, Conner, never drew a breath outside the womb. Sharon Rocha has spent the years since advocating for victims' rights. She has said that grief does not fade, it simply changes shape. The hardest part, she has said, is the absence. The milestones that will never happen. What we have are the facts. Laci Peterson disappeared on December 24, 2002. Her body was found in the San Francisco Bay, near the Berkeley Marina, where her husband claimed to have been fishing alone. Scott Peterson lied to his mistress, to his family, to the police. He showed no grief. He prepared to flee. He was convicted by a jury of his peers and sentenced to life in prison. He maintains his innocence. And Laci and Conner are gone, their names now part of the record, unresolved in the minds of those who still ask questions. If this case made you think, subscribe to Cold Case Beacon and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment below. Do you believe the evidence was strong enough to convict Scott Peterson? What other cases should we cover next? You're the reason these stories don't stay buried. Thank you for being here. Stay curious. And I'll see you in the next investigation.